Hello, everybody. I'm Dion Stewart. Welcome to Fostering the Third Wave with a DevOps Dojo.
And I'm Joel Tosi. Thanks again for everybody for attending. A couple housekeeping type things, of course. Everyone's on mute. We will be monitoring the chats. There will be time at the end, of course, for deeper questions. For those that are brand new to this idea of dojos, this is the great space for you. We're going to give you a nice overview of what this dojo concept is, why it works. For those of you that are a little more versed in dojos, also a good space. You can probably give some color and some good questions, as well as I think there's some organizational things we'll talk about that will be interesting for you. And last but not least, if you've been running from them for a while, it might just be good for you to compare notes. So we're going to walk you through this dojo and tell you some stories as we go. And thanks for joining us.
Okay, going back to the Phoenix Project. The third wave, as many of you who have read the Phoenix Project know, is improving daily work. So there's a quote from Gene Kim: improving daily work is even more important than doing daily work. So one answer to the question right away, what is the DevOps Dojo? The DevOps Dojo is in part a way to address the third wave. How do we go about setting up the conditions and a culture where we can focus on improving daily work?
Getting a little bit more concrete for you, this is what a DevOps Dojo is for us. And it's an immersive learning experience where a whole full stack product teams come together, they learn and apply new practices and processes, all while working on and delivering real-world products and services for their organization in their constraints. So the dojo is both a physical space and a way of learning and practicing. But just to be very clear about this, there's a couple of key words here to think about. The dojo is meant to be an immersive learning experience. That means people are coming here to learn. The focus is first and foremost on the learning and applying those skills. It's a full stack team, so we don't have just engineers come in to learn a pipeline. We don't have just operations people to learn how to do deployments. We don't just have product people come in to understand UX. We bring in a full stack, cross-perspective team to learn how these things work together to create meaningful, interesting products. And we also have, as I mentioned, there are full stack teams. This can be new for a lot of teams. We've had experiences in dojos where teams aren't used to being teams before. So the dojo can be a new experience for teams. So again, this full stack product team is pretty important. They are building real-world products. So this is not canned examples in dojos. This is teams doing their work and applying learnings to their work. And then lastly, they're in their constraints. There is no magic sandbox. It's easy to try new things and apply new skills in super safe environments where everything is perfect and nothing ever goes wrong. But the reality of the world is things go wrong. And so these are learning experiences within the constraints of your organization. The dojo is a physical space. It's where teams come to learn, and it's a new way of thinking and applying learning.
So Joel and I have been coaching teams collectively for quite a long time. We're both really excited about the dojo model and what we're seeing teams experience. We both have taught courses over the years. We've helped organizations go through agile transformations and pilot agile, lean concepts, some of these DevOps concepts. We haven't seen anything to date as effective as this dojo model. One of the teams that I worked with, their dojo was primarily about moving to the cloud. Within a 6-week time period, they had completely moved a couple applications to the cloud, including a transactional database and a reporting database with queuing between them. This is a team who had never done anything on the cloud before. While they were learning everything about the cloud platform they were using, they also took their pipeline and reduced the deployment time down from days to less than an hour. In addition to all that, at the end of their 6-week challenge, one of the women on the team made a comment that she felt like in that 6 weeks she finally got to know her team, and she called out one team member who had been hired 6 months ago and said she felt like she just now was getting to know them. So the team camaraderie and the collaboration and the teamwork that happened during the dojo challenge for that team was quite extraordinary.
So with that background, let's get into today's agenda. So we'll give you a quick introduction so you know a little bit about Dion and I. We're not the most interesting thing here, so we'll get to the meat of the matter here pretty quick. Get right into what problems do we address, how dojos work from the perspective of a team flowing into the dojo. How does that look? We'll get into what happens when organizations adopt dojos, because it's good to look at dojos as a way of helping teams learn, but there are organizational things that it does expose that we wanted to talk about as well. Last but not least there, we'll give you some tips on starting your own dojo, and again, questions throughout. We're here to help you. We're hoping that at the end of our time together today, you'll realize just how powerful a dojo can be, and you'll be excited to try one on your own.
So as I mentioned, Joel and I have been coaching for quite a long time collectively, about 16 years and 12 years respectively. We've both coached in 2 dojos in 2 separate large organizations. I've been doing this for about the last 18 months. Joel has been doing it for over 2 years. He was really kind of there at the beginning of the start of the first big dojo. And we're both advising a couple other dojos. Let's talk a little bit about the problems that dojos address. So one of the problems that dojos address is organizations today face a number of challenges. The barrier to competition is getting lower and lower with cloud platforms. We're learning that it's not just about the tech, that it's about product. We need to learn how to frame up product delivery well, learn product discovery techniques, get really connected with our customers. If you look at the entire DevOps value stream or technology value stream, starting with when someone has a business hypothesis to when we actually have product in a customer's hands that's providing value, there's all kinds of practices, techniques, areas where we need to become very knowledgeable within the organization. One of the things the dojo does really well is it helps us address this entire value stream. So teams come through and they learned not just how to optimize their product deployment pipeline, but all the way back to early initial product discovery, practices and techniques for that, and how to tie everything together. In the worst case scenarios Joel and I have been in, we've been brought into organizations to address one of these areas. And when we start trying to connect, say, techniques for product delivery with the larger organization, sometimes we'll run into actually different, in some ways, opposing techniques that people have done product discovery with. So it doesn't flow very well, and it's not easy to sort of seamlessly connect the dots between the different aspects of product development.
And so along those lines, what most organizations fall into is this idea of learning and training is an event that has to be planned and scheduled and budgeted. And so the idea is that, well, there's all these new concepts, and if I send 1 or 2 people, maybe once a quarter or once every 6 months, that they'll get all of these ideas and they'll immediately come back and they'll instantaneously spread it throughout the team, and then we'll immediately reap benefit from it. And just as this beautiful simple chart shows you, if you only allow learning to happen occasionally, and it's a very high ceremony event, then you're not really a culture of learning, not really a culture of experimentation. You're always business as usual. So to give you a little bit more examples of this, just like Dion, we've taught plenty of classes. To give you a concrete example, we've taught many test-driven classes, how to help teams apply test-driven practices. And, you know, I think we're pretty good at that. I've had one team come in the dojo, very smart people. They've been working on a C++ code base that was 20 years old, and numerous people have said, you know, you really got to fix the code because it's kind of weak. And the developers all knew that. And beyond that, they all knew how to write tests. And they've been through courses, but they never had the chance to actually sit down and do it. And on top of that, having developers sit down with such a large, overwhelming mound of code to work with, it was hard to know where to start. So in that dojo, we simply help them frame up where should we start, and let's continuously figure out ways to make this better working together, talking about what we're seeing inside the code. And so it wasn't about how do we get some arbitrary amount of coverage. It was about how do we just figure out ways to continuously make this better? How do we go about applying these things? And so again, this group of very smart developers had been through all the courses, but it didn't come into play until they actually were able to sit down, and we created a space for learning, and we created this environment where now learning and experimentation was the expectation. Good things happen when you can create these spaces for teams.
One of the other problems organizations face as they're trying to ramp up and get their staffs up to skill on all the skills necessary to compete in today's markets is how do they scale knowledge? It's one thing to bring one team into, say, an agile pilot and really increase the knowledge of that one team. The challenge then is how do we spread that knowledge and how do we scale that knowledge to the rest of the organization? There are numerous problems related to the ways organizations handle knowledge. The first of which is they treat knowledge as if it is a thing, that somehow all we need to do is talk to the people who have the knowledge, codify it somehow, put it in some form of documentation, whether that's written documentation or videos or some kind of permanent state that we can then simply hand off to another person who doesn't have the knowledge. They can consume that codified knowledge and now they have the knowledge. That's not really knowledge, that's information. Scaling knowledge requires an act of creation. So we don't just hand knowledge off to people. People have to create the knowledge for themselves. So in terms of scaling knowledge in an organization, we need to think more along the lines of how do we keep the act of knowledge creation flowing. Think knowledge flow, not capture. So kind of summarizing these problems we think the dojos address, the learning needs to be holistic. We can't be looking at specific aspects of the value stream and optimizing only specific aspects while other people are off taking different approaches on other parts of the value stream. It can't be limited, learning can't be limited to special events that are devoid of context and constraints. It doesn't stick, the learning doesn't stick when the real world context and constraints are not there. And then finally, efforts to scale knowledge can't be limited to simply documenting best practices. What works for one person, one team, might not work for everyone, and we might be jumping the gun to call that a best practice and spend a lot of time trying to document it. One other point I'll make before we get into describing the dojos in a little bit more detail is some of you might be saying, haven't we seen this before? You may have seen coding dojos with coding katas. Coding dojos are generally short, a few hours at the most, where people come together and do specific exercises around algorithm generation, creation, or test-driven development, various aspects of getting better at coding. The DevOps Dojo really is about learning in the entire value stream, the entire thing. This is not absolutely revolutionary. It is somewhat evolutionary, though. Here's a reference to an article. A professor named Dave West did kind of a radical new way of degree programs at New Mexico Highlands University. You can read the full article following the link on the bottom. But some of the key aspects of this effort were he was moving away from a defined curriculum. So think no more kind of predefined courses for degree programs, and instead was moving towards more of a competency-based approach to education. All the students sat in a single room classroom, if you will. They were working on real-world projects, so they were learning in the context of delivering real-world software. And they found that the learning happened a lot better than typical degree programs. Some students were actually hired out in the field after their first year of completing this program.
So with all this background on the challenges facing organizations as well as some historical context here, let's get into the actual details now around how teams look at the dojo and how these dojos actually function. There's a lot of information on this slide, and so to give you context here, this is from the perspective of a team coming into a dojo experience. So a bunch of these things we'll get into in more detail here in the next few slides, but just at a high level, The teams in the dojo come in for 6-week-long experiences. So we look at this, we create 12 2.5-day time boxes that allow planning, experimentation, learning in very rapid feedback in that manner. So it's a 6-week experience broken down into 12 time box constraints. That's how the teams work inside the dojo. It gives them enough time to repeat and try things. It also creates safety, which we'll get into more in a little bit here shortly. But how does a team even get into that big box of the dojo? The dojo is not meant to be a check the box type of thing that everybody comes into and they just kind of get it so that way in their annual review they can say that they went to the dojo. That is not the intent of the dojo. The idea behind this was we start with an overview that everybody can kind of see. It sets the understanding of what teams will experience in the dojo. We want them to understand the expectations. We want you all here working together for 6 weeks. For the duration of the time frame, we're working on our work together throughout the day. That means you can't come and go. You can't say I'll be there for an hour or two on Monday and I'll come back on Wednesday. We're setting expectations inside this overview. Assuming teams see this overview and they want to learn more, we bring them into a consult situation. So the consult usually has a two-phase approach. The first is to make sure all of the managers and any kind of leadership have buy-in, and they're also aware of what's going to happen inside the dojo, the expectations of the executives and the management that they will allow the team to have space to learn, the understanding that they are going to slow down before they can pick back up. Once the executives are on, we'll bring the team together and we'll consult with them, with the management involved, and have them understand together the expectations. Now the overview might just be a few minutes, maybe it's 30 minutes. The consults might be 30 minutes to an hour. Assuming that after this consult, the team is still excited and the executives are still excited, we'll bring the team into a chartering session. The chartering session is meant to get alignment with the team around how they're going to work for the next 6 weeks, what they want to learn, and make sure that they have concrete examples and they have common context of where they're going. That usually lasts about a half a day, just to kind of give you context there. Once they get past chartering, and again, that is also a go, no-go decision. Just because a team wants to come into the dojo, if it's not a good fit for the organization, not going to be a good experience for the team, organizations and the dojos need to be able to say, no, this is not a good idea. And by all means, we can help teams become more ready. Maybe they don't have the right people involved. Maybe they're too nebulous in what they want to achieve. Maybe they don't agree on what they want to achieve. We can work with them to refine that. But it's not just to come in because you've filled out the form. From there, assuming teams are now good, they come into the dojo experience, again, go through these learning experiences over 12 2.5-day sprints. On the outside of that, they do have an exit interview that allows us to support the teams as they go, helps us get feedback on how to improve the dojos, and it's also a way for us to figure out a plan supporting the teams when they leave. We want to make sure that anything that's in the dojo that teams are comfortable applying when they leave, and also they have plans for what they're going to do when they leave the dojo, kind of safety of the dojo. We'll get more into these specific small boxes here in a second, but this is the big overview. This is how, from the perspective of a team, what does their experience look like? The 6 weeks challenge is that big square. So the things to the left and the things to the right are not happening inside that 6 weeks. The 6 weeks is all about the learning in that big square. So how do you go about choosing teams? It's really important to make sure that we are setting teams up to be successful. We also want to make sure that the teams that are coming into dojos make sense organizationally. So real simple things to consider when you're thinking about bringing teams into the dojo. First and foremost, we want teams to work and learn together. So are they geographically together or are they geographically separate? We want teams that are in co-located spaces to be able to work together. Does the team have all of the perspectives necessary to understand a full product development cycle? Meaning, do they understand the needs of the consumers, do they understand the needs of the tech, and do they understand the needs of the run? So just like Dion mentioned in those earlier slides, do we have that full perspective on the team? Are they a true full team? Do they have the ability to get feedback? Do they have contact to customers? Do they have contact to consumers of what they're going to be building? Because the dojo is about learning about your product, it's about learning about your skills, and it's about growing things. And if we take that opportunity for feedback away from teams in dojo, it's kind of a disservice to them. And then lastly, we want to make sure that the teams that are coming into the dojo are your employees. We've had situations in dojos where we want to bring in contractors, and by all means, if an organization wants to do that, that's your discretion. But you want to be investing in your people, and so we want to make sure we're bringing in the right team. So again, be thinking about in this when you're choosing teams. Does a team have the right perspectives? Can they work together? Do they have a good ownership of what they're doing? Can they get feedback? Is it a good investment for the organization? These are critical things to be considering when you're choosing your teams for your dojo.
Let's talk a little bit about chartering. Chartering is one of my favorite aspects of the dojo experience because it's where we set ourselves up for success. Approaches like the fifth discipline and Peter Senge's concept of the learning organization have us sort of use systems thinking to imagine an idealized future state that we want to try and get the team into or the organization into. Chartering works kind of from the complex adaptive systems aspect where we're looking more at where is the team at right now, and we're assuming that learning and knowledge creation is a complex endeavor. It's not a simple thing. So in some cases we might have to simply experiment, probe, try new things, given where the team is at, taking them towards the next step of where we think they might get, not some idealized future state. We start with an elevator pitch and goals and success measures. Both of these are designed to help everyone get to the same shared understanding of what a successful 6-week dojo challenge looks like, both from a product perspective and a learning perspective. So one way to think about goals and success measures is we'll simply say, what are our goals? What do we want to have accomplished in the next 6 weeks? The success measures are how we can kind of give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to whether or not we achieve that goal. Did we hit it or not? Oftentimes we'll kind of iterate between these two things, the elevator pitch and the goals and success measures. The elevator pitch, you can think of it exactly like it sounds. Let's say you get into your building one morning, you get on the elevator, one of your leaders is on the elevator with you and she says, what are you working on, why? Can you quickly and succinctly in 3 or 4 sentences answer her question? And this isn't about coming up with sort of architecture, wordsmithing things that sound good. This is real concrete stuff. What is the product? Who are we working on it for? Why are we building this particular product at this time? And a very key aspect of the dojo experience is, again, it's not about product delivery only, it's about learning. So what are the learning goals that we're trying to accomplish while we're in the dojo? One team that I participated in chartering with kept throwing around the word parity over and over. They were a team that their organization had acquired a competitor, and they were bringing on the competitor's client base onto that platform. After a certain amount of time, I asked everyone to take out a sheet of paper and write down their definition of parity. I said, I'm not sure we're on the same page with what this parity word means. As it turned out, for some people, parity meant exactly what they had on their old platform. For other people, parity meant what they had on their old platform, and of course, we're going to give them every capability we have on our platform. For a third person, parity actually meant something called parity plus, which was a term they were using within their group inside the organization. And as it turned out, as part of the acquisition, some people had promised the clients on the old platform some new features that they had been requesting from their previous vendor for a long time as a way to ease the adoption of this organization's platform. At the point in time that Parity Plus came out, I thought we were going to have to call security and put the lead developer in a straitjacket because he spontaneously developed a case of Tourette's. He was really upset. They were not on the same page about what their product was, and one of the things he pointed out was there was absolutely no way this team was going to be able to accomplish any learning much less all of their learning goals that they had started discussing for the dojo, if they were going to have to implement Parity Plus. And by the way, if anyone's wondering, why not give Parity Plus the capabilities of the current orgs platform, as it turns out the data that they were getting in order to onboard the old clients was not sufficient to enable all of the features on the current platform. So that was new learning, new knowledge for many people in the room. So again, chartering is designed to get us to a point of shared understanding. We're all on the same page about the product goals and about the learning goals. In addition to the elevator pitch and goals and success measures, we'll talk through working agreements. Some of these are simply logistical. What time are daily stand-ups going to be? When will our sprint reviews be? Those kinds of things. We'll also get into any working agreements that the team wants to discuss and sort of agree upon as new ways of working for the next 6 weeks. So for example, you might have a team that hasn't been doing any code reviews, and maybe someone on the team will bring that up in discussion and say, can we agree for at least the next 6 weeks to try doing peer code reviews before anyone commits? Or maybe it involves adopting some kind of tool for automated code reviews. But those are examples of things that come up in working agreements. Finally, we'll do a skills matrix where we go team member by team member, address all the skills that that team wants to learn during their 6-week dojo challenge. And we have a simple key for team members to indicate whether they want to learn that skill, whether they already know it, or whether they think they're an expert in it enough, at least enough that they can teach other people on the team. So this is one of the way before the dojo even starts, where we start figuring out how the team members can help each other learn. This skills matrix also provides an opportunity for us to get into sort of the safety aspects, the safety culture of learning. It's set up front, and leadership usually buys into this, that this is a sort of judgment-free zone. We want an honest assessment of where people's skills are at today. They can freely talk about where they're at, what they want to learn, what they're interested in learning, what they're not interested in learning. So we're setting up that environment for them to have a safe way to practice and improve over time.
Sprints are an interesting topic for us in the dojo. And I think the reason why it's so interesting is that it's something so simple and so small, but it tends to have a lot of these magical kind of properties. So as we talked about early on, for us in the dojo, a sprint, or just a time box, is 2.5 days. So the team is thinking in 2.5 day increments around what should we do. It could be something as simple as the next kind of increment of a product. It could be the next thing of a pipeline. It could be the next best test. But it's these teams thinking in small increments around what's the next best thing that's going to help our team go forward. And what I like about this this simple small structure is that a lot of the noise starts to go away for teams. So a lot of teams that Dean and I coached prior to being in these dojos, they would spend a lot of time talking about their work and their stories, and they would do story point estimates. And by all means, estimates are good. Teams need to know kind of where they're at and where they think they're going. They need directional orientation. But if teams are spending an exorbitant amount of time arguing if something's a 3-point story or a 5-point story, it starts to lose its value. So by having these 2.5 day sprints where teams are oriented around their outcomes and what they're investing in, the conversations go away from that, and instead of being how big is this, it goes to is this too big? And that just helps teams orient around, are we doing the right things, and are we doing the right things to support this? All of our sprints inside the dojo are framed around an outcome. We frame them around what would it be interesting to learn or interesting to show for the next group of people that we're going to be showing things through. So it could be, again, validating a product idea or validating some pipeline or learning some tests, but we start from the perspective of what would it be interesting to show or learn in the next 2.5 days, and then figure out the things that we need to do as a team to support that. This can be challenging for some groups to think about what happens in a lot of organizations that we've been in. the planning aspect is very individual based. So we kind of have a bunch of stories. People might pick what they want to do, and they just go off the tasks and do it. To give you an example from a team that I was working with this week, I always want them to know, what are we doing next? What are we investing in next? And so I asked one of the members of the team, I go, what are we doing for Thursday? And the gentleman replied, oh, we all know what we're doing. And I said, well, can you tell me, because I wasn't here? And he explains it to me, and he's kind of smiling because he knows that I always ask him these things. And I then kind of pushed a little bit further, and I go, does everybody on the team know this? And he kind of smiles, and he goes, yeah, they know. And I go, well, let's do test-driven sprint planning. And so I grabbed a member of the team, and I go, hey, what are we doing for Thursday? And this woman very politely goes, I don't know, but so-and-so knows, so you should probably ask him. So again, it's not that anybody was doing the wrong thing, it's just that it's different. And so we're trying to get these teams to orient around, instead of around their individual tasks, it's orienting around the group's outcomes, and that you need a safe space to do that. The last thing I'll offer up for you all is that the 2.5-day thing makes it safe to fail. If you're building something, or you're trying to learn something, or if you're going down a deep path, if you're investing a lot of time, it becomes scary to be wrong. But for the teams inside the dojo, this 2.5 time space seems to be enough time where it's just enough for them to prove out an idea, or get enough learning to say if they should continue investing or not, or move back and not feel bad about it. I had another team early on that was going through these spaces, and we were talking about what mapping solution we should use. And so you kind of let it go initially at first, but then you realize the team is discussing mapping solutions, if they should use Google Maps or MapQuest or build their own, for more time than it would for them to actually run a quick experiment. And so we stopped the conversation. We said, what are some of your concerns? Let's frame some of these concerns, and let's figure out how to learn how to move forward. And that became a better conversation, and so then we were able to frame the learning experience to help us make a decision. So these sprints, as being short, allows good focus from a team. It allows us to all focus on one thing together, and it makes it safe to experiment and be wrong. And it seems so small, but it's been a very powerful tool for us in these dojos.
Giving everyone an idea of what this might look like for a couple teams, and also making it a little more concrete what we mean when we say the dojos are adaptive and there isn't a predefined learning plan that every team goes through. Here's just some example scenarios. One is a team doing new product development, and maybe they're new to microservices and service development. Another team might have an existing app that they want to migrate to the cloud. So usually the first couple days of any dojo challenge are around doing some form of creating a backlog for the next 6 weeks. For new product development, that might take the form of product discovery. Think personas and story mapping and customer interviews, those kinds of practices. For a team moving to the cloud, they're not doing new product development. For them, it's more about diving into what are the stories that we need to do, what are the things we need to learn, how do we break this problem of moving to the cloud down in such a way that we can accomplish it in these 2.5-day sprints and hit our learning goals. And finally, when teams are finished with their 6-week challenge, we will go through kind of an exit interview with them. And in some respects, this is kind of like an overall retrospective for the Dojo Challenge, where we talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, what goals we hit or didn't hit from chartering. This is useful information for the coaches who are working in the dojo to help them improve the dojo as a product and an experience over time. It's also helpful for the team to start making some plans and decisions about what learning they want to carry forward once they're outside the dojo. So this is not just a retrospective. This is a place where we will talk about what is your next best investment from a learning and product standpoint outside the dojo. How can we assist with that? What information might you need? Do we need to reconnect in a few weeks to review some automated test cases? Things of that nature. We'll also talk with the teams about how they might contribute back to the dojo experience itself. So the dojo is about changing the culture of the organization. It's about scaling knowledge. We've often had times where people who have been through a 6-week dojo challenge and then are out kind of in the wild, back doing their normal product development, applying what they learned in the dojo, those folks will come back and help teams learn things they've already learned, actually be sort of the coaches and mentors for people for an afternoon or half a day if they did something really similar to what a team currently in the dojo is trying to learn.
Dion gave you a nice example of two teams' learnings. Teams that come into dojo can learn a variety of skills, again, from continuous integration to test-driven, product exploration, UX, kind of customer validation, how to plan, how to do a bunch of these things kind of in the context of what they're trying to solve. Again, very adaptive. This poster is something we stress. We put it up in a lot of organizations because at the core of it, we stress practices and values because those are the things that are consistent across teams. We help them understand how tools support those values and practices, but we have to have them understand that tools are volatile. The idea behind the dojo isn't for somebody to come in and a team to come in to create the best pipeline ever inside Jenkins and understand Jenkins and Jenkins. That's not the intent. What we're stressing with them is what makes a build good. What are the needs that you have for your product to make you feel comfortable putting this thing in front of customers where you don't think it's going to break and fall apart? And then how do the tools support those practices and values? So again, we help them understand the tools, but we're stressing the values and the practices inside here. To give one example in this space, we had one team in a dojo about a year ago that came in and their product needed a messaging platform. And so they really wanted to learn this open source messaging platform, Kafka. And so at first the team, all they wanted to learn was all of the nuances of Kafka. And so we had to help them reframe it into like, what helps you in your product that you need messaging, and then how does Kafka help you support that? And if you didn't have Kafka, what are those kind of essence and core things that you need to have to be able to support your product going forward? So again, we will help them with the tools, but we have to start from the values and practices space.
So the dojo is a physical space, and we don't have time today to get into specific details about how to go design a space. At a high level, think classroom, not delivery space. You want a space optimized for learning. You want a place where people can socialize and learn from each other. If you really want to dig deeply into how to go about setting up a physical space for a dojo, I would highly recommend this book, Clever Digs, How Workspaces Enable Thought by Jenny Quillian. Jenny worked with the architect Christopher Alexander. I'm sure some of you are familiar with him being sort of the model for the software patterns movement. Software patterns came about looking at his architectural patterns as the basis. There's a lot of great info in here about setting up the physical spaces, everything from the actual location of items, the distance between coaches and teams, say, layout, etc., all those aspects. So we've just gone through kind of the overall flow of how the dojo works, talked a little bit about the physical space. I'm not going to go into detail on this too much. I will mention right now the slides will be available after the webinar. We'll make those available on the website. So this information will be available for review.
So we talked a lot about how dojos help teams. But the reality is it's great for teams, but these dojos will have large impacts outside just the team and what they're learning. And this is a good thing. This is what helps make dojos a cultural transformation vehicle. One thing to think about in this space is we're trying to get teams to learn, and all the friction that happens around teams learning is usually it's caused by other organizational challenges. And by all means, they might be there for good reasons, but usually they're there kind of they're usually there because of accidental complexities or organizational structures that kind of got in the way. When teams are trying to work in 2.5-day sprints, if they can't deploy their own code, it becomes very painful very fast. And so these things get bubbled and escalated. And it's not necessarily a problem for a team to solve. It's a question for an organization around how do they want to react to these things. Do you want your team to be able to do these things? You say you do, but there's all this data that now says to the contrary. It's also might be, we also find friction around how teams work within teams as well as across teams. We had one team in the dojo, and it was almost humorous because you could tell that they were not used to working together. So I was sitting with a front-end engineer, and the back-end engineer comes up to me and he tells me his service is done and the front engineer can now work on it. All the time while I'm sitting right next to the front-end engineer, and I say to the gentleman, I go, so you mean this person next to me can now use your service? And he goes, well, yeah. I go, well, you could just sit down next to him and work on it. And he was like, well, I don't know if I can because I have to work on other things too. And so you start to realize these kind of artificial organizational boundaries that are created become challenging for people to kind of get past. And so we get these data points and we get these examples that now we help the team with and overcome, but now we have to bring these up through the organization and say, here's what's causing friction within your teams. Here's where we think it's coming from. How do we go about doing this? It could be something as simple as teams working together. It could be something as scary as teams sharing code. That seems to be challenging for some organizations.
So as Joe mentioned, there's a lot of friction that can happen around learning, and the things that cause friction around learning are usually endemic of other things happening in the organization. In the same way, we can use the dojo to help identify and magnify constraints in the organization. If you're finding the same constraints over and over and over for every team that comes through a learning challenge, whether it be around security policies or onboarding new team members, getting software installed on machines, any of those kinds of things, the dojo fitting inside the larger organization can kind of report that information out. Tying back to Phoenix Project and improving daily work in the third wave, this is a way we can sort of identify the constraints. What are those constraints according to the theory of constraints, and what are the constraints we might want to start conversations with in the rest of the organization around removing those completely separate from the dojo experience itself. The other thing we've learned is that dojo experiences help reveal cultural and organizational biases. So one team that I worked with got very clear in chartering around their learning goals and their product development goals. By the way, just to make clear too, a question that often comes up is, does a team have to pick something that they're going to completely deliver within 6 weeks? The answer to that is no. Oftentimes we help teams get started with product development efforts that continue after the dojo. But in this one case, after getting really clear with chartering, we went through the first couple weeks of the dojo and everything was fine. People were happy. People were happy in the sprint reviews every 2.5 days. And somewhere around the third week, one of the leaders with the group started asking the question, when will it be done? And became very focused on the team focusing and almost the exclusion of anything else, just getting this product development done at the end of the 6 weeks. There's gravity here. This is like a black hole for most organizations. We say we want to focus on learning. Everyone has best intentions. When push comes to shove, it's very easy to fall into old habits and get very focused on delivering. The dojo is not an accelerator. So while some teams might come in and actually deliver faster in the 6 weeks that they're in the dojo, for most teams, a dojo challenge means slowing down for a little bit. We have to slow down first before we can move faster. We have to slow down to absorb the new skills and the new knowledge.
So just, again, in summary, these dojos are great tools for your teams to help them skill up, but it's also going to have an organizational impact. It's going to tell you things and expose things that you might have thought about, but maybe they weren't as painful as you thought they were. It's going to expose biases that you need to address kind of outside the dojo. Just to give you one more kind of example in this space, we've had a team in the dojo. There was obviously a constraint for delivering this one new product, and it was a self-service thing kind of inside teams. And there was 2 teams working together to deliver this thing internally, this service internally. the one executive, the one manager for one team, always assumed that the challenge, the bottleneck, was a different team. It was the testing team. What we quickly realized was that was never the constraint. The constraint was always actually his team. He kind of thought it was a different team, so he never allowed his team to focus on finishing anything. And so it was kind of that challenge of his team always focused on starting and never focused on finishing. But across the duration of longer cycles of delivery, it didn't become clear that his team was the bottleneck. But as soon as we started to remove some of these things and try and get lean and focus on problems, it became obvious that we had to rethink how teams interacted with that group. So again, Dojos are great for learning teams, learning new skills for teams and applying them. They will uncover things for your organization, and that will help you build a stronger stronger organization overall.
Okay, so hopefully some of you are curious now about this dojo model, and you might be wondering how you can go about getting started with your own dojo in your organization. The first thing we would recommend is you want to be very clear about where you're going to put your focus. Don't try and start a dojo addressing every possible offering that you might put out there. Align the dojo with this larger strategic direction of the organization. Is it about platforms? Is it about clouds? Is it about microservices? Is it about product discovery? Pick a few practices and a few good candidate teams to experiment with the dojo model on learning those practices. Go through chartering, go through the dojo challenge, and kind of do an assessment at the end of the challenge to see how well the dojo helped the team learn those practices.
As we've mentioned a few times, dojos are physical spaces where teams come together. Often that can be very costly for an organization to take on. Say, for example, you wanted to have a brand new space that was ultra collaborative with the best creative space available, and you just don't have it, and you don't really have the budget to create one. That doesn't mean you throw it out the window. We have worked with organizations where they'll start with the experiment. So they'll instead of creating a space and having a team come to the coaches, a coach will go out to a team and they'll work with the team in a space. And in those examples, usually what happens is, because the teams usually don't have good spaces to work together, they'll rent out a conference room, or they'll book a conference room for 6 weeks. So now the team has a place to come together, and now the coach comes there and they're working with the team holistically in this conference room, for lack of a better place, to help them learn things. You can start there. It's totally fine. It's a good way of proving it out and showing progress and then growing from there. My only word of caution for you there is, if you do that, please, please, please do not skimp on the idea of whole teams working together on learning things. All the things that Deanna and I have been stressing around creating a safe space for teams to learn together and try things. Please don't say, well, we can only get the conference room on Mondays and Thursdays, so that's the only time the dojo will happen. That's just a very discontinuous view, and teams need to kind of get into the feel of the dojo. And so if you have to go to a team, please make sure you create at least a good space for them and a time, and you create the window for learning.
And then the last recommendation on getting started, don't skimp on coaching. So the dojos can be a great place to not only skill up your teams, but also to improve your coaches' skills. But you don't want to staff a dojo with sort of junior coaches and people who don't have a lot of experience. One reason for that is, again, the dojos are about learning. It's not just about adopting Scrum or Kanban or some other practice that people might have experience guiding teams in. When you're coaching teams to learn, it's important to keep an eye on the safety element and those learning goals. And sometimes at the beginning of a 2.5-day sprint, you'll be working with a team and they'll be really adamant about heading down a certain path that as a coach you feel is the wrong path. There's a judgment call that needs to be made there. Are you going to allow the team to go down that path and safely fail or prove you wrong, as the case could be? But if it is really something you've seen before, you know the team is going to fail, do you step in every time and sort of correct the team? Having the experience of coaching teams for years is kind of key to being able to coach teams into the dojo and really foster this learning environment. You're also going to want to hire experienced coaches to help guide the other coaches that are part of the dojo challenge. One of the things Joel and I do with other coaches and with each other on a constant basis when we're together is we'll leave a chartering session, or we'll leave a session where we were working on a pipeline with a team, and we'll say, this is what I saw, this is how I responded, this is why I responded that way. What do you think? What did you see? Would you have responded differently? What was good and bad about that session? So we're constantly sort of going through a coach-to-coach process, if you will, and using the dojo as a place to improve our coaching.
So, in summary, hopefully you're all jazzed about dojos and you're ready to start your own. Just, our recommendations for you here, just like it was mentioned by Dion, choose that core set of practices that are relevant to your organization right now, and not just kind of the cool thing of the moment. Pick things that are relevant to your organization now, and plan on growing those skills in your teams. You don't have to go all in. You can go to the teams, start where it makes sense, adapt as you can, and grow. Don't try, and one other piece of advice I'd give you in this space is don't feel like you have to create multiple different dojo ideas for anybody. Like, keep it simple. Right now it's a 6-week experience. I'm working with your team. We're going to figure out how to learn, adapt, and grow, and then treat your dojo as a product and help it to grow over time as well. And lastly there, just as Dion mentioned, staff your dojo well. This is a good way for growing your own internal coaches as well. This is a good way for creating or giving people that might be a little burned out and they want new ideas and new opportunities and they want to help people. This might be a nice way of revitalizing careers for people in your organization. But please make sure you get good people working with your teams. And with that, that's what we have for you all. What kind of questions do you all have? I don't know if we have it open for sound or if we have open for chat. What do you have?
We don't have it open for sound, but we do have it open for questions in the webinar control panel. One came in a little bit earlier from Dan. He says, I think of coding dojos as a place to practice coding katas outside of a production system. Emphasis is on a safe way to practice and improve. DevOps dojos apparently are applied in production. Seems to be a different definition of dojo. Can you comment? Yes, it definitely is a different definition of dojo than kind of the coding dojos, again, that are usually an hour or a couple hours at most, where you're doing pre-existing katas. We will at times use some of those smaller katas in the context of a 6-week dojo challenge. So when we're teaching TDD, for example, there are several katas we fall back on for people who are brand new to TDD. The statement that Dan made, emphasis is on a safe way to practice and improve. Couldn't have said it better. That's exactly what the DevOps Dojo is about. It is about a safe way of practicing and improving. Are they always applied in production? Most of the time, the teams that work on product development effort in the dojo are working on production code. That is very intentional because, again, we find the learning sticks better. New habits are formed better when people are applying the learning in the context of doing their real daily work. It's, again, back to this idea of improving daily work. It doesn't always have to be production code. So one of the teams I worked with kind of in the IVR space was investigating a new platform and how well that new platform was going to work for them. They were also new to the cloud, so their dojo experience was primarily about exploring the capabilities of this new platform and using the cloud to kind of implement and deploy the platform. So they're learning not only about the platform, but also about the cloud. So it doesn't always have to be production code. Another question, so with a large majority of teams being located globally, is there a model or dojo example for non-co-located teams that fosters the same collaboration? Joel, can I throw this one at you?
Thanks. I guess the short answer is it's just hard. The things we're trying to do here, location makes everything more difficult, or I'm sorry, location and separation makes everything more difficult. In my experience with the dojos, the things that have made distance okay has not been so much the practices or the things we do, so much as how we can engage people and the personalities of the team. One example, I had a team that was distributed. One person was only, I think, even the same time zone, but just like the personality-wise, they never really wanted to engage. And so we would talk about, hey, let's kind of explore this part of this service a little bit, and let's work on it together. But the gentleman would just say, well, I'm going to show you the one thing, and then I want to leave. And so it's all about kind of the personalities and how people want to engage. We've had other teams where they just kind of set up in those working agreements very explicitly how they wanted to handle remote workers, and they would pair people that were in one spot with another spot, and they would share things over media. And that was a great experience. But I think that was more based upon, again, the personalities than it was anything else. What do you think, Dion?
I would agree with all of that. I think the biggest thing that's a challenge for teams that aren't co-located is if they've never worked in a co-located environment and they know what good collaboration looks like, it's really hard to emulate that with a distributed team. I do have a friend who coaches teams. He coached a fully distributed team. This wasn't in a dojo context. It was in a normal product development context. But it worked very well for them. But one of the reasons it worked well, he thought, was because the team members all knew that experience of working in a fully co-located environment, and they did everything they could to kind of emulate that experience. So, for example, they had a team Google Hangout, and the Google Hangout was open all the time, all day long. So there was never any friction about dropping into a video chat with someone. You didn't have to fire up a new video sharing meeting, send out new invites, anything like that. It was just a quick message on instant chat, hey, drop into the Hangout, we need to talk about something. So the friction for going into the Hangout was very low. We've got one other question here I'll try and take a quick stab at, and then we'll wrap up. Comes from David. Do you have any tips? The first one from David was, what skills does a dojo coach need to have? Do they need a technical background? Great question. Not every coach in the dojo has to have a technical background. If you are offering services around product discovery, basic agile, lean, and Kanban processes, you can have coaches that focus on those areas. I am kind of biased towards people who have some level of technical background, and obviously if you are trying to teach people DevOps, pipeline optimization, TDD, all of those kinds of skills, you're going to need people with technical skills on your coaching staff. Having said that, you're going to want to make sure you have a team of coaches collectively in the dojo who can work with these teams to make sure they are delivering all of the knowledge, all of the skills that the teams are there to learn. It doesn't have to be embodied all in one person. Okay, so we'll leave you with one parting thought that comes from Deming. The greatest waste in America is failure to use the abilities of people. As we mentioned at the top of the hour, Joel and I are really excited about these dojos. We think it is a great way of actually using and developing the abilities of people. We want to say thanks to everyone for attending the webinar. Also thank IT Revolution Press specifically for helping us promote the webinar on their newsletter and providing support and encouragement. Please visit dojoandco.com. Joel and I have just started blogging about dojos. If you have specific questions that you would like to ask that we blog about, we'd love to hear your feedback and ideas. If you have things you'd like to talk to us about more on one-on-one basis, our emails are here, and you can reach out to us via those mechanisms. Again, from my part, thanks for attending. Joel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you to everyone for the support. As Dion mentioned earlier, we'll get the slides sent out to you, and this was recorded, so if you want to socialize it with any of your peers or your friends, you're more than please do.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.